Hello everyone. Welcome back to another roundtable in our Knotch and MikMak roundtable series. So I'm Ryan Sloan, the Content and Communications Manager here at Knotch. And I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us, people that have attended in the past, and even those tuning in for the first time, and welcome you to Knotch and MikMak's Marketing Roundtable on adapting to the new normal. So as we're facing a reality of social distancing and a new period of working remotely, we're gathering marketers together across all industries to discuss just how brands are dealing with COVID and how marketers are adapting as a result. So before we begin, I just wanted to note that this conversation is going to be an open and honest one, so that way we can just learn from each other and grow together. And also during this panel discussion, feel free to write down some questions that you have for either Rachel or Anda or any of the panelists that you can just send to the Q&A box that Zoom has on the bottom of your screen if you see it. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our hosts, Anda Gansca and Rachel Tipograph, as they lead us through this discussion with brands like Shell, GrubHub, Google, Dell Technologies, Prudential, and more. So our first host is Anda Gansca. She is the co-founder and CEO of Knotch, a content intelligence platform enabling companies like Amazon, Facebook, Walmart, Bank of America, Salesforce, and others to plan for breakthrough content, as well as measure and optimize it across channels. She's a regular thought leadership contributor to the trade media and industry at large, and she's been named to both Forbes and Inc.'s annual 30 Under 30 lists, Adweek's Young Influential list, Campaign's Female Frontiers list, and Adweek's Top 100 Creatives, just to name a few. And we also have today Rachel Tipograph. She is the founder and CEO of MikMak, an enterprise marketing e-commerce platform that helps brands better understand consumers by connecting digital investments to online retailer insights. She's been recognized as a leading innovator across the globe, including Forbes 30 Under 30 Who Are Changing the World, Marie Claire's 50 Most Influential Women in America, and Fast Company's Most Creative People in Business. So pretty successful. So without further ado, I will hand it over to them.
Thank you.
Rachel, every time I hear our bios, I remember that when we met, we were still 30 under 30. And now that's still in our bio, but we're not under 30 anymore. Hopefully we're becoming more successful though.
Well, listen, it brought us together. That's all I care about.
Exactly.
So, I can't believe this is week 5 of us doing this. Pretty wild. On my way to prepare for this, I got a text message from the city of New York extending their pause at home through May 15th. So we definitely have more webinars ahead of us. But I think at this point in time, we've reached 6,000 people, which is absolutely insane. And for whatever reason, have been able to convince some of the most brilliant marketers and business leaders to join us. And I'm really excited to hear from everyone today. But I know, Anda, we wanted to talk about adapting to the new normal because it doesn't really feel like this is gonna end anytime soon. And I think we all have a lot to learn from the last 5 weeks. I'm curious to hear things that have been working at Knotch. I polled my team today in Slack and I said, hey, for the webinar, I want to share with everyone what you actually have felt has made an impact at the MikMak culture during this time. And I thought I would share some of those poll results. And maybe some of you are doing these things already within your company, but if not, I've gotten at least positive feedback on these few things from the team. So it started, we closed our office March 10th. When did Knotch close our office?
March 6th.
Okay, yeah, you were way ahead of the curve.
And I remember I texted you and I was like, do you think this is like weak of us to not go back to work? Like, does this mean that we're putting out messages that we're not serious enough about our work? And it feels so crazy to have asked that now.
No, I mean, you were absolutely right. You had the crystal ball. So we started March 10th and, the end of our Q1 was obviously March 30th. And historically we would have like a big celebration as a team. So I didn't want to cancel the celebration. So we did the celebration via Zoom. I bought everyone dinner, meaning I allowed them to expense it. Everyone was drinking. We had, so much fun. And we did a big award show. One of the things that I feel is really important right now is that we find ways to recognize individuals within the company and try to make a really big deal of it. And that seemed to really resonate with the team. Another thing that seems to really resonate with them is we kind of created a company policy where you got to have video on in calls. And people have said that that's been a positive impact, and they've even been forcing that with clients, which I find quite interesting. Another big thing was, once the school system closed, and I'm sure you had to deal with this too, Anda, figuring out how to support parents that work at MikMak. Because the reality is they have a full-time job and now they're full-time homeschooling. And I have so much respect for a lot of people who are in that situation right now. And I actually called up Claude Silver, who's the Chief People Officer at VaynerMedia, and I asked her, how are you managing this with parents? And she told me that they created a policy where parents can just block out time in their calendar. It says personal time, no questions can be asked. At MikMak, I'd say 25% of my employees are parents. So I wanted to create a policy that could work for everyone. So everyone is entitled to put anywhere between 1 and 3 hour personal time blocks in their calendar. If they're delivering results to the business, that's all that we care about at this point in time. That rose to the top. And then finally, we're doing expert Zoom classes. So once to twice a week, we find a chef, a yoga instructor, a breath instructor, and we're doing company classes via Zoom. So those are some of the things that I've gotten feedback from the team in terms of what's made an impact. I want to hear what's going on at Knotch.
Well, so what's funny is I just finished a 3-hour board meeting. So if I start speaking in Romanian, all of a sudden you'll know why. And I asked them for advice at the end because I think New York in general has just been worse hit, but our team has gone through a lot over the last couple of weeks. We've definitely had a lot of people on the team who are sick, a lot of loved ones who were sick, some people who passed away in our network, and it's just made things darker than usual. And I reached out to the board, and at the end we said with my co-founder, what have you seen really work? And we had a little debate around, how much do we talk about our feelings at work? How much do we want to bring that into the way we do business? And what was really interesting is the advice was to kind of come back to what makes the company special and to double down on the fact that now more than ever, what we do is relevant, and not a lot of companies have this. And I think that's true for MikMak as well. Mm-hmm. We have heard time and time again, this is not just me, being biased saying this, but we've heard on these webinars, obviously e-commerce, super important, content, extremely important, people kind of going back to brand and embracing it in many ways. And so bringing it back to the mission, I think I know it's basic, but I think it really resonated with me and my co-founder, and making sure that we're investing in the things that matter, which we're telling our customers to do as well. We're investing in content, we're investing in marketing, and we're investing in product, and we're continuing to hire. And I think that message of momentum and of investment in our product and our strategy and our mission is always going to be the thing that's most important. Separately, just a couple of other points. We created a mandatory break, which we then had to also make sure we respect as leaders. And that was the second, after a week, we were like, oh guys, hey, we really need to lead through example here. But 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time every day, you're not allowed to message anyone or to, respond to any messages if you're messaged. And it's helped because we needed to kind of give people permission when the lines are so blurred and work is life and life is work. We needed to just tell them stop working, essentially. And then finally, in terms of parents, more than half of our leadership team has at least one kid. And we have folks on the leadership team who, both parents are working. And one of our leaders, Maddie, who's amazing, she runs a customer success team. She has times during the day when she has her daughter, and then she has times when her husband has their daughter, and the times when she has her daughter are the times we can schedule calls with her, and the times she doesn't have her daughter are the times that she does, focused work. But she's been one of the most productive people in the company, and I also get to see Tilly, her daughter, on conference calls. So all in all, I think positive. But yeah, those are some of the high level things. And I know today we want to hear about the new normal from all of our panelists. And I'm very proud of the lineup we put together today. I think we're going to hear of a few different perspectives that hopefully will give us a sense of where not only marketing, but also company culture is across the board. So I'm excited to jump in.
Yeah.
Any other reminders?
Yes.
Yeah.
Few quick things, real quick. So for folks who've been joining us for the last 5 weeks, thank you. You guys know the drill, but just to share it, there's a Q&A function. Submit questions. We're gonna, every half hour, pull from the questions, turn to the panel speakers, and allow folks to answer them. So please do that. And if you ever need anything, you know how to reach Anda and I, you know our websites, but just definitely give a plug there. And then finally, you might think I'm in a very large closet. I am not. My internet cut out in my apartment. If anyone works at Spectrum, I need your help. And I ran to my friend's store, Cal Meyer, amazing pantsuits for all the lady bosses on the line. Please check it out. I'm wearing one of her shirts right now.
And Rachel's also going to be changing into many different outfits throughout this webinar.
I might.
So
I'm literally in a store, guys. I'm in a store. So real retail is happening. All right, turning it over to you, Anda. Who is our first speaker?
Thank you, Rachel. So our first speaker today is Dean Aragon from Shell. Dean is the CEO and the Global VP of Brand at Shell Brand International, where he's currently responsible for the voice and image of one of the most massive global brands. And prior to this role, Dean spent nearly 2 decades at Unilever when he served in a high number of marketing positions. Dean, I wanted to hear from you before we jump into the questions. Tell us a little bit about, one, your background, and two, I know you're in Europe and it's really late for you right now. So first of all, thank you for joining us. But tell us how things are looking like in Europe. You're the first speaker from outside of the US that we've actually had.
Hi, and of course, good evening from Zurich. I actually live in Zurich, and thanks for inviting me. Well, you know, you hear all the news about Europe, and I'm also from the UK, and I'm very concerned about what's happening. But at the same time, I'm, like every other Brit, I'm immensely proud of the NHS and all the other first responders, the police, people who transport essential goods from point A to point B. In Switzerland, it used to be one of the highest infection rates per capita. Looking at the data, it seems to be on a steady decline in terms of new infections. I obviously monitor that because I live here with my wife and 2 teenage kids. But at the same time, I'm worried sick about my 3 other children who are now into their 20s, but they're not with me. You know, two daughters are in London. Either working from home or studying from home. And I have an adult son in Boston. He goes to Berkeley. And of course, I'm also worried about him. He's even further away. I think no matter how old your children are, yeah, it's always, especially in times like this, critical that you sort of still become very nuclear. And you know, I think my parental instincts will never dissipate.
Thank you for that. I know that you've spent quite a lot of your career at Unilever, and I'm curious to hear, looking at Unilever from the outside now and how the crisis has impacted them, what are your thoughts? And I think if you had the kind of the CMO role at Unilever now, what would you do?
I think, you know, unlike Shell, I mean, Unilever is a house of brands, and I've been very fortunate to have worked on, you know, quite a few of them. I guess most noteworthy are my stints in the Dove team, in the Axe or Lynx team. I also, you know, handled some of the hair brands like Tresemme and Suave and Sunsilk. But, you know, because they have these individual brands, they're making sure that how Unilever responds as a company, but also through the brands, are consistent with their brand strategy. I just commented on Alan Jobe's post about the Dove ad, where they're featuring, you know, the medical workers and how, you know, the reality of their day, of their struggles. And, you know, as an alumnus of the company and of the brand team, you know, I was very proud. I thought it was quite authentic and quite moving, and obviously on brand.
I know when we were talking ahead of the conversation, we were talking a little bit about what's on brand for Shell. As well. And so I'm curious to hear, because you had some really fascinating things to share with me. I'm curious to hear, how have you thought about the purpose of brand and how much you'd want to be out there as Shell during the crisis? And how have you thought about not putting the voice out there?
I mean, like, you know, I think as a brand guy of Shell, I think the first instinct that obviously kicked in was, you know, how do we make sure that we're of help, that we're of service? And I was very quick, because I knew that many of my colleagues would be very interested and eager to do what they can. But at the same time, I needed to make sure that I provided the guidance on, this is not a time to sell, especially hard selling. This is a time to be of service. This is a time to be available. And so it was important for us to focus on that, consistent with the purpose of the company, consistent with the character of the brand that represents the company. And I think that's why, although it hurts to make some of the calls with it, it's a suspension of brand advertising, suspension of some of our critical events like the Shell Eco Marathon, which caters to about 10,000 students around the world, submitting their very creative and very innovative designs on the future of mobility, these ultra efficient cars running on all sorts of fuels and energy sources. But we had to. And of course, later on, I can talk about how we're compensating for some of these cancellations with more digitalized ways of honoring some of the commitments. But it's a very difficult space, and I think we're all just learning as we go along.
I'm curious as to how you've decided to either share or not share some of the meaningful work that you're doing during this time. And I remember you mentioned something to me that I want the audience to know. Shell's actually doing a lot to do their part in this crisis, and yet you're choosing not to broadcast it. Curious as to why.
Well, first, there's no such thing as a global customer or a global stakeholder. So we're taking advantage of Shell's multi-local footprint to make sure that our response is very focused on the very unique and different needs in each market, because each situation is different and it requires a different set of solutions. So I don't really want to enumerate everything, but we've done things like making sure that first responders get help either in fuel, food, or beverage. One of the essential ingredients to hand sanitizers is a petrochemical derivative, which is isopropyl alcohol. And some of our plants have been directed to really make sure that we can produce more of it as fast as we can. And we're donating a significant amount of it to those who can produce the end product of hand sanitizers, and making sure that they are then channeled to either governmental organizations or medical facilities. And I think that's really what's critical. A local touch to local customers, but also where Shell operates, where our people work and live, the communities that we are a part of. How do we become a helpful neighbor, helping at a time where many people need help? And they're very vulnerable at this stage.
And what about where you have decided to compensate and deploy some of these dollars? I'm sure you're trying to save some of the powder for when the economy comes back, but what are some of the things you've decided to proactively invest in?
I think right now we continue to invest in really understanding how the market is evolving, but at the same time I wouldn't call it keeping our powder dry, but really making sure that we make sure that we address the needs of the business at this stage. At the same time, we have an enduring business. We are here for the long haul, and therefore, you're right that all brands and all companies need to look at what's going to happen and towards the recovery, and when we recover, what's the new reality, what's the new normal. And I have a few thoughts on that as a marketeer, but also as an ordinary citizen of my community.
And I would love for you to actually share some of those, because my next question was going to be, how do you think this crisis is going to impact the way you run marketing at Shell, the way the marketing team functions, but also in general, the marketing profession?
I think in many ways, I also have to always remember how I grew up in the Philippines. And when you grow up in a third world country, there was always a crisis, either a typhoon, an earthquake, government upheaval of some sort. And you just learn how to really be resilient. But you do realize one thing, which is that at times of extreme difficulty, I'm sure some of you and many of you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you always go back to the base needs at the bottom of that pyramid, you know, for shelter, security, safety, food and nourishment. And I think all of us in marketing, in brands, or all of us in business have to remember that these are what should be essential in our portfolio. How do you either repurpose your existing value propositions, your products, your services, to address those fundamental needs, or what might that pivot into in terms of addressing the new normal? You know, a protracted social distancing reality. What would that mean in terms of innovations? In some parts of Shell, we're experimenting with you order and then the grocery basket is put directly into the boot or the trunk of your car, so there's no contact. I see many restaurants that are serving up their favorite recipes, but as a cook at home, you know, ready to go, rather than an on-premise consume offer. I think that it's also an exciting time for marketing brains to really flex those inventive, innovative muscles and make sure that we really think what will be the new normal. I don't think we're going to get back to what we used to be, because I think there will be a different kind of psychology. And my uncles, my parents and my grandparents talk about World War II and how many suffered during that time. And the years 1945 to 1949 in the Philippines, but I'm sure like many other countries, were very, very bizarre years where, you know, you're recovered, you're safe, but then, you know, how do you channel the spirit of recovery, rebuilding? And my prayer is that we also channel the spirit of unity. Because if anything, again, just as an observer, the reality is that this disease does not recognize your color, creed, culture, or country. And if we're going to come out of this in a good way, I think one of the things that we should come out with is how to unify as humans, and how do we help each other even more.
Thank you. I have a question for you from the audience, from Philip. It says, "Hi Dean, so amazing that Shell is doing their part in this crisis. The brand has customers, including consumers and franchisees. How do you think about meeting the needs of both? What will that look like in the future? Have you seen any indicators from China and the market opening up?"
Yeah, so our team in China is amazing. I mean, throughout the crisis, you know, they did pretty much what I've been talking about, and just being available, being open, make sure that there's fuel for transport. We're able to provide electricity and natural gas for cooking, for heating, and I think that's amazing. And now that China is beginning to recover, we're also seeing an uplift in the performance of our business there. But obviously, unless of course a lot of what China also supplies in the rest of the world recovers, then, you know, there's also a gestation period that we have to be conscious of. But to the point about our customers and franchisees, I think that whether they are franchisees or dealers or distributors, I mean, at the end of the day, the name of the company, the brand, is still Shell, and therefore we need to make sure that we have a very consistent way of approaching our customers and stakeholders, and which is to channel that spirit of service and being of help.
And do you guys generally, even kind of pre-crisis, in that spirit, do you think of your franchisees just like your customers, or is there any differentiation in the way you market to them?
Well, our franchisees are both our customers and also the representatives of Shell, right? So they are part of the Shell family. They are part of our network, and they service also our customers. For instance, at the retail business, the motorists or shoppers in in the shop behind the station or in front of the station. They are the same customers as we do. So we don't see a difference other than, for instance, the differentiation in the revenue streams and the arrangements between whether you're a company-owned store, a dealer-owned store, or a licensee.
Got it. Thank you. Really appreciate that, Dean. Appreciate all the insights. I hope you can stay on. I know it's late with you, but we're going to have a few more questions from the audience that we're going to open up to everyone. So
I'll try to hang on as long as possible.
Okay, you can turn. We'll allow you to turn off.
10:30 in the evening in Zurich, but I sleep late, so that's fine.
We'll allow you to turn off your camera if you want to, but you look great for how late it is there. So thank you so much, Dean. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So as a really great follow-up to Dean, we have up next Naveen from Prudential. Naveen, welcome. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you great. Thanks, Anda, for having me.
Yeah, so Naveen, you are the Chief Marketing Officer at Prudential Financial, where you're responsible for the stewardship of the Prudential brand, customer engagement and acquisition, and connecting the company's customers and prospects to needs-driven solutions in their channel of choice. Prior to Prudential, you worked for 20 years as a senior executive in several Silicon Valley companies, which makes your background really interesting and in some ways unique. And so I would love to hear from you just a little bit as you put both your tech hat on as well as your financial hat on. What are some of the big things that you're seeing in terms of the new normal inside of companies? And have you seen Silicon Valley be different at all in the way they're responding from New York, where I know you're currently residing?
Yeah, lots of things there to unpack. So first of all, thank you. This is what I'll say, being bilingual in both tech, East Coast and West Coast, large companies and small companies gives you a little bit of a unique perspective. And this is what I would say, that smaller companies are far nimbler, which is kind of generally what you would expect. But the impact that large companies make and the scale at which we make that, we have to learn how to be nimble. And crises like COVID actually allow you to be nimble, because what happens is that the processes that we set up in a larger context actually don't work. So one of the things that that comes to fore is the purpose and what's really key and core becomes clear, very, very clear across the organization. So what I actually saw was that the large companies start operating like small companies when a crisis happens, which, by the way, when times are happier, everybody's worried about kind of their turf, so to say. But when you kind of get into a crisis mode, the focus around the key stakeholders, I think, gets really highlighted. And the speed and velocity and decision-making is so much more streamlined. It's exciting to see that happen. Lost you. You're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you for that. That's a really interesting point. The large companies functioning more and more like small companies. I actually think we've all seen really great productivity and kind of efficiency coming out of this remote work that we weren't expecting. Probably a little bit too much. And so that's an interesting insight. So Naveen, I know that you've made some big decisions coming into this, coming into this week, and even right after the crisis hit, you were also trying to make some big decisions going into the crisis. So can you fill us in on some of the things that you decided on as soon as you realized what was happening?
Yeah, it was a very interesting crisis for us. I think, so just to kind of give you a sense, we have 46,000 employees across the globe. In US alone, we serve about 25 million customers. And the way the crisis manifested itself, first of all, the markets went crazy. So we saw market drops like, 2,000 points, 1,500 points, pretty much on a consecutive basis. So when that happens, people were dealing with many things. So they were dealing with anxiety about their own lives, about their families, about the pandemic. But in midst of all that, they were also losing their portfolio values. And by the way, this is not just individuals, this is also institutional clients. So I think one of the things we had to do as a marketing team was kind of sit back and say, how will this crisis manifest itself? And that was really critical to us, because if we understood that, we can plan a strategy around that, right? So the things that we understood was, first of all, our job as a company would be to reassure people. And the fact that when these things happen, we come out of that. And whether the recovery is going to be a V-shaped recovery or is going to be a slow recovery, nobody really knows. but there is going to be a recovery. There is hope, and there is a way to come back. And by the way, the more we think about it, I don't think this is a 2-quarter crisis. I think this is a 4-quarter crisis. This is not like 2008. This is not like 9/11, but there is an end to it. And end to it, when we talk about the new normal, is going to be a place where I think there'll be profound changes in how we think about healthcare. Really, I think that's an area which is going to get torn apart in terms of future of it. I also think how we use data is going to be quite different as we think about the future. But in the manifestation of things, anxiety and reassuring people was probably the first order of the day. But then if you think about what we do as a company, so we support these 22 million customers in the context of their disability income. We send paychecks to retirees. We make sure that any claims we have on life insurance. So we are sitting in the thick of this crisis, right? At the same time, we are not the first responders. So how do you balance the fact that you're not a first responder, but behind the scenes, you are actually a first responder? And we had to kind of plan for that. And I think if you go a little deeper than that, the next stage of that was, so first is like the bread and butter. We need to make sure we can reassure people, have claims all set up, have the call center volumes we take care of, have proper reporting so we can make decisions. But then can we go beyond what we do? And I think that's where the role of multiple stakeholders, what are we going to tell our investors? What are we going to tell about our customers? Communities, right? So we have a $1.5 billion community fund. How are we going to leverage that to create community value, right? So suddenly the number of stakeholders that we had to engage with was very high. We also were creating massive amount of content. So for us, it was about, how do we look at different stakeholders, employers, pension plans, large retirement companies, individuals, advisors. So we actually launched about 300 pieces of content in 5 days. We built from scratch 5 new websites across different audiences. So that required a level of connectivity in the organization that we had to orchestrate. And my point about large companies operating as small companies, the definition of momentum is mass times velocity. If you can take mass and scale of a company like ours and combine that with velocity, you create tremendous momentum. So I think we saw that momentum come through quite clean and clear, but it was a lot of orchestration. And I think I like that word orchestration because the different instruments, everybody's playing their own thing, but in the end, there has to be a symphony. And I think sometimes, that symphony becomes cacophony and you have to deal with that. But how do we orchestrate in this was really critical for us at scale.
I am so happy to hear that you created a lot of content and that you set up a bunch of new websites to host it and that you got your team galvanized around it. It obviously means a lot for us and for the industry as well to see you really leaning into it. I know that you made a bunch of last minute creative decisions. I would love for you to fill us in on that. Tell us a bit about the difficulties you had to deal with in making that happen. How did you galvanize both internal and external partners around it, especially with the remote work aspect?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story here. It was really kind of amazing. So we have been working on launching a new brand campaign. And I don't want to kind of give out the campaign yet, but I'll give you the context. The context is we as a company generally don't talk too much about what we do. And that's a kind of a handicap, but also the strength. We believe that being like a silent observer, but helping a lot of people is a good thing. So we were trying to change culturally the fact that we can actually go out and talk a little bit about it. So we presented to the board, and the date for launch of that big campaign was actually first week of April. And so you can imagine we had bought media across like TV, and we had bought media across programmatic. I mean, we had a plan for over $50 million in first month, and we were going to spend close to like $500 million over a course of 4 to 5 months. And when something like this happens, you have to immediately say, okay, that plan ain't gonna work. So that much you're very clear about that we have to do this and we can't do that, right? So first thing you gotta do was kind of get our media team going and saying, okay, anything that we have bought, can we repurpose it? Can we delay it? What can we do about that? So I mean, this is where the orchestration part comes in really clearly. Then we had to go to all our key stakeholders, including the board, and tell them, listen, all that we agreed upon, we're going to change that. And the real notion was, I think we were thinking about the secret is out. And that was the kind of the messaging behind the campaign without actually getting into the campaign. So we had to completely pivot that. And within 2 weeks, we actually kind of redid the entire campaign and changed it to Outlast. So the secret is out became Outlast. And the notion that all of us have to persevere through this, be resilient, and then outlast this pandemic to a place where we can climb back up. So we haven't given up on the secret is out thinking, but we are leveraging that out in a broader context of Outlast. Also, we changed the media from being like 30 seconds a minute to more 15 seconds and 30 seconds, because we believe that the frequency of touch is going to be quite critical at this stage versus overall messaging. Because when all said and done, right now, I think all you can do is create a subliminal way for people to remember you when they are ready to act. And in a category like financial services, most people right now are frozen. They're not really making many decisions. They just want to make sure that their portfolios are preserved, but a lot of activity would come back maybe 3-6 months down the line. So you still want to be there for your customers. You still want to be out there talking about who you are, but the tone and the mentality is more about thanking people for their perseverance. How will we outlast this together? So it was quite an interesting exercise of redoing our entire creative, our entire brand dollars and media. So it was kind of 24/7 operation going on. And I think one thing which I learned from this, which we missed, and I want to kind of acknowledge that, was we have a global company, right? So we were getting signals from Japan and Korea and many other places, but I don't think we actually did a great job learning from it. And the reason is that our company, our team in Korea actually was going through this, and they were doing their part in it. But we felt that the crisis was so far away from us. By the time it comes to US, it will manifest itself differently. But it really didn't. And the pace by which it came through, so within like, I mean, you guys talked about you were out of work at like March 8th. So between March 8th and March 21st, the world had turned upside down, right? So we could have actually done a better job of leveraging a global signal that we didn't really do. So that's a learning for us that, especially when things of this scale are going on, we got to listen more carefully.
Thank you, Naveen. And thank you for being so honest. I don't know if any of us could have envisioned that those signals were as serious as they actually ended up being. The one last point that I wanted to make is we've heard from a lot of CMOs that they've just paused, frozen the paid marketing, especially the performance marketing side of things. And yet when we were talking, you mentioned, no, we've actually decided to continue. And I just wanted to just very quickly hear from you, what was the logic behind that?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to it. There's a overall brand spend and pay, like, and spend from a media standpoint. That's a very different thing, because that messaging has to be far more understanding people, right? But when people have specific needs, so what are the needs right now? I think the needs right now, we are seeing very high demand, or at least people interested in life insurance in a big way. Right? People are interested in healthcare insurance right now, because obviously people who had ignored these things, they're looking at that, right? So I always talk about fast money and slow money. So we make decisions on fast money very quickly, but when it comes to slow money, really big decisions about investing and buying life insurance and those kind of things, people are generally not really receptive to that. But crises like this create opportunities whereby people are really focused on it. Actually, incident yesterday, we had a call where this person called and they had 2 kids, 20 and 23, and on the phone they bought life insurance for themselves, their spouse, and their 2 kids. We rarely see somebody buying 4 life insurances in one call. But what that's telling you is the anxiety is leading to needs. And given the needs exist from the customer, especially on the paid side, if we can create focused need-based solutions, there's value to it. So we're not going to actually go down on it. We are going to increase our spend, and there's no reason why we would not. So really, the thinking here is, if there's a need and we can express that need more clearly, then putting more dollars behind that need is not a bad thing, and we're going to see results from that.
That makes a lot of sense. Naveen, thank you. One final quick question from the audience. Did you paint that painting behind you?
That's actually my wife. You know, she was painting. We share this room, and last night she was painting. I think it's not fully done yet, but yeah, she was painting on it last night.
It's beautiful. There we go. So now we know that fact about you.
There you go.
Sell her painting.
So Rachel, we're going to do a quick poll, and then we're going to have one more interview, and then we're going to take a few questions from the audience for everyone, just to give everyone the run of show. So over to you, Rachel.
Great. Naveen, does your wife sell her paintings? We can give her a shout out.
Yeah, sure. I think it's perfect. And I think it's stress decompressor for her. So
when she's ready for e-com, you just hit me up.
Yeah, exactly.
Meanwhile, let's pull up the poll. So, has your content and communication volume changed as a result of COVID-19? Let us know. Decrease, increase, and if it increased, by how much?
Wait, you guys, to the team at Knotch who's handling this, it says host and panelists can't vote, which doesn't seem fair. I want to be able to vote. So if there's a way you guys can let us vote, please let me vote, because I want to save 4x or more.
It's just funny that that's a feature in Zoom. You know, of all the things they need to share right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
Well, so we're going to share the results.
Great. Well, in the meantime, I cannot wait to pull this person up. If you guys do not know Stephen Wolf-Piera, then you might not be working in our industry. SWP, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Rachel and Anda. Hello, everyone on the panel.
Hello. So for folks who don't know Stephen Wolf-Piera, he is the CEO and co-founder of Encanitos, which is honestly going to be the next great children's media company around the world. And you're already off to such a phenomenal start. I mean, I think within your first 6 months, you guys won an Emmy, which is absolutely remarkable and well-deserved. And I've been thinking about you a lot, so I'm happy we can catch up here, because you always have so many things up your sleeve. Like, you've been launching consumer products, new IP, a digital education platform, and I've been actually wondering, when COVID hit, did SWP change his plans? Or is he still moving full speed ahead?
I think SWP knew that this would happen and had the crystal ball before all of us, knowing him.
No, definitely not. But first off, thank you both. I mean, one, you're just, such strong, incredible leaders. But the fact that you're keeping our industry together, that you're bringing us this information and just really providing this forum is just a testament to your leadership. Just so thanks to both of you for doing this. It's great to see Knotch and MikMak, again, playing a leadership role in the industry. This is a really unique time because, 9 out of 10 kids around the planet are actually stuck at home. And it's, interesting. I left, 20 plus years working in corporate, mostly in B2B and technology and finance, and most recently as a CMO, to really focus full time on building an entertainment education company that was really taking the power of technology entertainment and really applying it to education. And the thesis was that everything is going to be impacted by 3 macro trends: digital, diversity, and most importantly, direct to consumer. And we always had this thesis that direct to consumer is going to happen to education. It's just going to take longer. Mm-hmm. Well, that is not the case anymore, because everyone around the planet is now learning how to do learning at home. And it's interesting, while everyone is really focused on how do you take care of your brands, how do you take care of your customers, we at Encantos are trying to figure out how can we take care of your kids, because everyone is realizing how inadequate and just how arcane the education system is. It's so focused on standardization and testing, and you're really lacking ways to keep kids engaged. And they're not focused on 21st century skills, whether it's learning skills, literacy skills, or life skills.
And
so,
Stephen, what would be, just because I'm so out of your space,
yeah.
Who are the major players right now in like children under 12 years old online learning?
Sure. So, it's really a very fragmented space. Obviously, the way that we frame the marketplace, think about two ends of the spectrum. On one end, you have pure entertainment, kind of kids and family brands. Obviously, Disney, the gold standard, but, Pixar, anyone else that's doing kind of family entertainment. But it typically lacks substance, and it's, great storytelling, but did we really need Toy Story 4? I don't know. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have pure education, which is typically teachy and preachy, and it doesn't really have a brand, and it's really kind of focused on testing and just standardization. So the ed tech companies, there are tons of apps. Just go into the App Store for Google, iOS, and you'll see all these ed tech plays, but there really is no brand. There's no character. There's no storytelling. Mm-hmm. So I think people are trying to figure out what to use. And, there's just, great stuff out there like Khan Academy. There's Khan Academy Kids, but there really is no one that has kind of fused entertainment and education. And that's kind of where we're trying to do that.
It's funny what you said when you opened up, because I'm seeing the same thing, but in a different sector, right? Which was online grocery shopping. We're now, consumers are where we thought we would be in the year 2025. Yeah. And the fact that that's happening for children's education is amazing. Now, I know you launched something pretty significant within 48 hours. Yeah. Can you tell me like what that is, how this came to be, and what early results you're seeing?
Sure. So, we are certainly a direct-to-consumer company building family brands, but we're really taking all of the kind of learnings of enterprise SaaS and bringing it to education. So that's kind of like our macro thesis. But we were planning to launch our first paid subscription app in the fall. So think about a Netflix-style model, all you could eat, and a subscription-based model, but we had to accelerate all of that. And so it's really been kind of a tale of two cities. On the one hand, we are incredibly impacted by COVID. I mean, all of our kind of brands, they actually start with books. Here's our latest book for tiny travelers, India. We will be doing Transylvania at some point. So Anda will make sure that you are a country guide. But the reality is all of the kind of revenue projections and forecasts that we had, they all have to be reset because we have been so impacted like every other brand. So on the one hand, the impact is real, but on the other hand, we have a huge opportunity to make impact. And that's really where we've been focused. We launched the Encantos Learning Hub in 48 hours. And the whole idea was, how do we provide resources to all these families at home? And we have the benefit of building purpose-driven family brands because we're also a B Corp. And so we have the #1 bilingual preschool brand called Canticos. It's always great because we actually have real physical products. So we have show and tell. This is our new bilingual first series. So teaching, English and Spanish, for kind of kids 5 and under. But we launched the Learning Hub with free lessons, activity sheets, videos, and we're uploading that content every day. And it's free for all kind of kids, families, educators, really trying to provide that service because the reality is, I have 2 young kids. I have a 4.5-year-old and a 2-year-old, just like you were talking about, Anda and Rachel. Like my wife, Nuria, we take turns, doing the homeschooling. Like it's a real issue. And I think that's one of the positive things that you get to come into people's home because of COVID. You also now get to see people's families and their kids.
So because you're living the life of an entrepreneur and you're now living the life of an at-home teacher, mm-hmm. What behaviors have you witnessed with your own children when it comes to online learning? Like, are they paying attention? Do they get distracted? Like, I want to learn more about that.
Sure. So part of the whole thesis is, education is really boring because it doesn't take the best of entertainment. I mean, if you think about it, how much money did Pixar spend on their latest feature, Onward, right? They probably spent easily $150 million. They spent 4+ years. They had people obsessing about storyline and characters and all this engagement so that you are drawn into this story. How much time is a teacher spending on a lesson plan? right? Like how much thought or, activity, went into that. It's really hard to compare the two. And so you see kids now having to learn through Zoom and they get bored in seconds. It's so hard to capture their attention. And it just goes back to what every great marketer knows. You really need to have a story to engage an audience. And it's no different when it comes to learning. And if anything, this is now the AI era. You actually really need to focus on what are the skills that kids need to learn. And part of it is creativity. It's storytelling. That is going to be more important than ever. So we really are trying to figure out how do we tell all the things that we need to the kids to learn, but in a really engaging way, and having characters help tell those stories is a key ingredient as part of our special sauce.
And I think when we were chatting, you mentioned that you're bringing this to teams. There's sort of a B2B aspect to what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the spirit of, what both Dean and Naveen were talking about, this is really not a time to be thinking about the commerce side of it. I think it's really the opportunity to focus on how are we all connected. We are all in this together. Everyone is using that as kind of like a catchphrase, but it really is true. And so what can we do if we're building family brands? Well, we're not in the B2B space. I'm not going to be working with Prudential, but Prudential, Naveen, you said how many, employees do you have? All of them are home. All of them are struggling with the same thing. If we could actually provide our free learning tools for every single brand that's out there, we're already working with Procter, we're working with MasterCard, we're working with large brands so they could bring these additional resources to just add it as a supplement. I mean, everyone is trying to figure out how to make it easier for their employees at home, but the kind of overlooked area is the learning part for their kids.
We love to talk to you, by the way.
Happy to help.
We'll facilitate that intro. And if you don't, I'm sure you already know each other. Now, Stephen, even though you're no longer a CMO, and I'm going to brag about Stephen for a second. He was CMO of Newstar. He was the CMO of Quantcast. He was the head of marketing at Oracle. He has had a phenomenal career, and I personally have learned so much from him in terms of how to do B2B marketing.
And by the way, he always takes our calls and he always helps every time we need anything as big or as small. So yes.
All right, I'm just going to exit stage left. I'm done.
Our industry, but I say all this because you're so plugged in to the industry. I want to know what you believe are going to be the lasting impacts of COVID on our industry.
Sure. So, I like to think of myself as a human LinkedIn, and I just really believe in the power of connection. And I might be second only to Nadine, who you have here as a panelist as well. So she truly is the Uber connector. But, we actually do, a bunch of us, I serve on the board of the Ad Council, and a bunch of CMOs, we do a weekly CMO Zoom therapy session. And so it's a lot of great brands that you know and love. And I feel that, Naveen, you really just kind of scratched the surface. There's a consensus that this is not going to be a forever change, but this is going to be a multi-year change. And I don't know if people are really preparing for that. You just saw the unemployment numbers, literally over 22 million filing for unemployment. This is going to have just an incredible long-lasting effect that we are grossly underestimating. And we see it first with kids, right? So let's say if COVID, they start relaxing, kind of all the rules, and we're able to start, interacting with folks. Are parents going to let their kids go to school? That's a real question, right? And so how do you actually think of any type of business that is dependent or involves gathering of large numbers? Facebook literally just came out. It just came out a couple of, maybe like a half hour ago. Let me find the exact headline. Facebook cancels all large physical events through June 2021. So this is going to be something where it's going to force everyone to rethink the way that we're connected. I think there's going to be a huge privacy issue because all of the tracking that's being done and all the stuff that you all talk about in terms of first party data, how does that reframe the relationship between consumers and brands? But I do feel that this is also a really great time for innovation. And you're seeing it in terms of creativity. You're seeing families kind of do virtual tours where they'll get, kind of a video of a roller coaster ride. They'll put their kids in a little tub and they'll kind of fake the roller coaster ride. I'm really excited to see what innovation comes out of it, but this is something that is not going to be short term. That's my
I have to
understanding.
say, your Instagram probably is very different than mine because I haven't seen that video yet. Different life stages. But Stephen, can you tell everyone here, because I'm looking at the Q&As, how they can engage with your brand? Where should they go?
So it's real simple. You can just send an email to hello@encantos.co, encantos.co, or just go to our website, encantosbrands.com, and there you could actually see the Learning Hub. Just click on Learning, and there's a link to kind of connect with us. Happy to work with any and all brands out there. It's all free resources for kids and families.
And if anyone needs to get in contact with Stephen, hit him up on LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm sure he'll get back to you.
Absolutely.
I think we want to take a question for the whole panel. Anda, which one's burning? And our panelists, you can take yourself off mute and we can all collect.
I have a good one. It's a follow-up to what Naveen was saying. So Scott is asking, what is your advice for marketers to retain that small business mindset and close collaboration once this global storm ends?
So Stephen, you want to go? Or you want me to go?
Well, I'm living in the small business mindset, as an entrepreneur, and, we have about 25 employees. And I would just say that the most important thing is that connectivity, right? And how are you just truly agile and doing the ruthless prioritization to figure out what needs to get done this week? And it is incredible, liberating when everything that is just bullshit, you're able to just push it aside. Like, you don't need to do the stand-up meetings. You don't need to do like all the kind of, political stuff. Like, what needs to get done? And how do you have this get shit done mentality? That's been our overarching focus. So every single day we know, what are we getting done today? And that was critical for us to accelerate the app from launching in the fall to actually launching it, at the end of this quarter. But I would just say, how do you have the ruthless prioritization to understand what is everyone working on and getting done this week? When you break it down to that kind of almost atomic level, it's very easy to go fast and have an agile mindset.
I cannot agree with you more, Stephen. I think at least my general view is do a few things, focus, and do them well, which means that you have to create extreme clarity of outcomes. And I think marketers sometimes get caught up in activities versus outcomes. And frankly, just focusing on, okay, these are 3 things that we really want to nail, and do less. That creates the real clarity. And frankly, I actually think that, talking about new normal, we would need less marketers, but smarter marketers. And I think that's something which we are not recognizing now. But as we think about over time, the value will get created by the outcomes and less but clear versus lots and lots of stuff. And by the way, that's very true for content too. It's not about number of things that you put out, it's the quality of content.
And I'll go, if you don't mind. So where I really agree with Stephen is this. So often we start to get focused on the how of the thing that becomes the most current thing, right? So if you think about agile development and agile as applied to marketing, what is actually a very good concept suddenly became just nonsense, because it was, here are the rules of how you do agile, and here's all of this bullshit that surrounds the way you do it. And you actually lost the idea, which is you're trying to know what you are testing. And you are trying to understand quickly if you are failing or succeeding. It's that simple. And instead, you got this whole kind of set of rules that came up around this concept of agile. And so what I'd like to see us take forward is do stuff faster, but get rid of all this nonsense. And frankly, the other thing, and Naveen said it as well, so often marketers, I hear it in my own organization, it's one of the reasons I don't like industry conferences. We're always talking about the technology, or we're talking about the how, and we lose sight of what it is we're trying to accomplish with our customers and would-be customers, and even if you lead communications for your organization, your own internal employees. So figure out what you're trying to do before you get to the technology that's going to enable it. Otherwise, you're going to automate the wrong stuff.
If you don't mind, I'll jump in as well. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but it's interesting because literally just today, probably 2 hours ago, I just released a new CMO Moves podcast with Raja Manar, the Chief Marketing Communications Officer of MasterCard. And this is exactly what we were talking about for 30 minutes, because everyone's struggling with this. And I think what we've seen a lot of in the last 4, 6, 8 weeks is that the really large brands out there have resources at their disposal so that they can pivot and shift and still maintain the investment in their brand reputation and make those trade-offs between the short-term implications. But a lot of the small businesses continue to struggle, and the biggest piece of advice is collaborate together, build strength in numbers, bring yourselves together with like-minded individuals, and really leverage your unique superpowers to help each other out. And then don't be afraid to lean in on the big brands too. Ensure that they're part of your ecosystem, which is exactly why we launched the Brands Together platform, because we are stronger together than we are as one.
Funny, Nadine, I feel like Anda and I are a living case study of what you just said. We're two small business owners who came together and partnered with bigger brands to, amplify and the message and the opportunity to create community. So we wholeheartedly agree. Anda, who is next?
So next up, we have Jessica Burns from GrubHub. Very excited. I feel like GrubHub is a brand that's very close to our hearts, especially during a time like this. Jessica, welcome. I remember I met you at one of our breakfasts and I immediately thought you were one of the smartest marketers I'd met. Very curious to hear what you have to share with us today. So welcome to the stage.
Thanks for having me. We've been tired as a brand. It's rare for a non-essential service like delivery to quickly pivot overnight and become an essential service. And my team, I'm so proud of my team at GrubHub, because we have launched in the last 5 weeks 2 national campaigns. We've released probably 5 to 6 new product features overnight to basically accommodate this shift to delivery and support our marketplace, which is our restaurants and our drivers. So when you talk about agility, we have been living and breathing that. And as far as kind of maintaining the integrity of the work and just the health and wellness of my team, that's been on top of my agenda every day. As far as how we get that done, every day is a reprioritization meeting. What are we focusing on? What hasn't worked? What do we need to optimize? What have we learned from our community? How do we pivot our message to make sure that, we're supporting kind of the needs of that community? So it's been such a roller coaster, but I'm super proud that we've been able to kind of feed the nation and provide people with, little bits of comfort from their favorite restaurants over these last 5 weeks.
And I'm curious, Jessica, as you were thinking about the role of marketing in this, I know some of the conversation we had during the breakfast was, the kind of breakdown between performance versus brand. I know you guys were really starting to think about brand as being really important, thinking about the role of content. Has the crisis shifted that at all? It sounds like you've done 2 big brand campaigns in the last few weeks, but tell us a bit about that breakdown between the two. How have you thought about that?
Yeah, where I work for a tech company, I'm sure Nick can attest to this too, is we test everything. It's, multivariate testing. Performance is super important to us. And, our performance, our growth, and our brand teams are sometimes at conflict because of that. But the one thing that we did unite around over the last 5 weeks is we need to kind of lead with what our community needs right now. And we need to be focused on supporting our restaurants and providing them with an ecosystem that's efficient and effective. And we need to be supporting our diners to make sure they're getting delivery safely. And we need to make sure our drivers are being supported as well. And if they come in, under COVID and get this, this virus, how can we support them with paid leave? So we haven't been as rigorously analytical, I think, over the last 5 weeks. We've been very much brand led, what's right for our community. And what's really interesting through all of this is all of the work that we've put out, all of the content has been some of our top performing content. We put out a TV spot nationally for GrubHub that was in support of our restaurants, and it's like the highest performing TV spot we've had in GrubHub history. And that was produced in 48 hours.
Wow.
So it goes to show, my boss, our CEO, I keep on telling him that the 48-hour turnaround thing is not realistic. Like, you cannot expect this going forward. It's an anomaly. Hopefully we won't have to do this again, but it's certainly transformative, right? And honestly, it's been really empowering for my team, where we'll come up with an idea, we'll quickly green light it, and we'll push it out. And they've been really inspired by that. And again, I'm just so proud of how they've been handling it, because it sure hasn't been stress-free over the last couple of weeks.
I can tell you work for a tech company if you go to your CEO and tell them, please don't expect this type of agility from me in the future. Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned the things that have worked really well. What are some of the things that haven't worked? It's obvious that you've leaned into creating content about COVID. What are some of the, over the last 2 weeks, the things that you feel haven't been as effective?
Yeah. What's really interesting is, as a brand, from a targeting perspective, we usually target nationally. It's the most efficient, especially when it comes to TV. We usually don't focus on local. But what's interesting about COVID is, the coasts are getting hit with COVID, and kind of the maturity of COVID on the coast is very much different than the middle of America, right? So we can't take on like a one size fits approach to how delivery kind of fits within these markets. And so we quickly, for New York, for example, for all the New Yorkers here, it's kind of crazy how many people have like left the city over the last few weeks. 30% of restaurants have shut down. And so what we've done is we have like quickly pivoted to how do we support the market in like the most effective way. We continue to kind of talk to our diners and our restaurants and our drivers on a daily basis to figure out how we can better support them through this. So it feels like it's constant optimization, but not based on the content. It's based off of the learnings that we get from our community and how we can kind of enhance their experience from both a product experience perspective and a messaging perspective to make sure they're being supported and safe throughout all of this.
So my last question to you, Jessica, because you guys have been working so hard and your entire, extended family at GrubHub has been working so hard. What have you been trying to do internally as a company to make sure that you're maintaining productivity, but also morale, mental health, health in general, et cetera?
Yeah. My team is broken up between New York and Chicago. So we function very well with, remote work. So I feel like the video conference thing has always worked for us. We know how to manage it. It's never been an issue. But because we've been working really 24/7 and really every weekend, I think some of us were talking about kind of an afternoon break. We've been implementing that with our teams too. And we're calling it kind of a wellness break where they don't think about work and they either focus on their family or their self and self-care. So that's been really effective. Having kind of a morning and an evening meeting, a check-in with my teams to make sure they're focused and we can reprioritize as necessary, because there's so many things that we have to execute on a daily basis across our marketplace. So it's overwhelming at times, but that constant reprioritization is super important. And then, we also have been doing just mental health, polls throughout the week, what has worked, what doesn't, what have you liked, what have you doesn't. We're constantly recalibrating the number of meetings that we have, and the way that we're communicating to our folks. This is a whole new world of we're taking a lot off email and a lot more on Slack and a lot more on video conference. And it's been like a whole new way of working, but I think communication throughout this is key. And we want to make sure we get it right. So once we get back into work, they're going to feel even more motivated.
Well, thank you not only for bringing all this positive energy to the webinar, but also for doing what you do. GrubHub has played such an important role in making sure that we're all staying fed, but also connected to our favorite restaurants and keeping those restaurants alive. So thank you for everything.
Thank you.
So guys, next up, I want to welcome Allison Du from Dell Technologies. Allison, can you hear me?
I can. My mouse, there I am.
Here you go. Hi, Allison.
I never get off mute and off onto video as quickly as I would like. It's like,
well, that's something for you to work on for the next few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's my internet connection. I think there's nothing to be done.
Okay. So, Allison, I am very honored to have you today. I tried to get you to join me at CES like 2 different times, and you said, I really hate big events. I'm not going to go to CES. And here you are joining us here. So I'm very honored to have you. Hopefully the fact that it was a virtual event made it better that it wasn't in Vegas. I don't know.
I will say I ran marketing for the PC business for a very long time. And when I became the CMO a couple of years ago, one of the things about which I was particularly excited was now I could send my team to CES and I no longer had to go.
I understand that, having been there, I think 4 years or 5 years in a row, there's a silver lining to the fact that we'll probably not have to go this year.
Yeah.
So Allison, very fascinating to hear from you. When we were talking, on the one hand, we were discussing all the ways in which not only the world, but also all businesses, and in particular small businesses, are hit by this crisis. Separately, we were talking about some of the aspects of the Dell business that are doing great, and how in some ways it's almost harder to make decisions because of those different signals. But obviously it also helps figure out what to invest in and what to divest out of. I'm curious to hear, what were some of the big decisions that you felt like you had to make almost immediately as you jumped into the crisis?
So some of them are probably pretty obvious and things that everybody has to deal with. We had a series of big events coming up. Our big event was supposed to be in Las Vegas in the first week of May. It's 15,000 people. We made the decision quite early on in March to cancel that. We originally were going to take it digital, and we had a very great plan over how we were going to run that. But then very quickly, that also seemed tone deaf. So instead of doing a very celebratory conversation about what we were doing in the first week of May, if you look at it at the peak of the curve, we thought we would be seeing very horrible stories on the news about people in hospital, and who really wants to sit there and listen to our digital event, if we're being really honest. So we pivoted then to make the decision that we weren't going to do any in-person events for the entire calendar year. And that was a decision that was tough, because you think about my teams, they're thinking, okay, well, we're not going to have the big event in May, but soon I'll be back in business. And I think it was Stephen who made the point about early on, we were probably not honest with ourselves about the length of the crisis. So there was some decisions that were specific to my organization around events. There were some other decisions that we participated in around, we moved very quickly in March to global working from home for our entire employee base. And, we're talking about over 100,000 people working from home. And that meant that how we communicated with our teams was even more important. So communications is always one of the important parts of my job, but suddenly, together with my colleague who runs communications, that internal communications became even more important, because we actually see significant demand for our products. If you think about companies who thought they had business continuity in place, but they didn't really maybe have the systems that they thought they did. And then at the same time, children who may not have the access to technology that they need to do remote learning. So we've seen, as an essential industry, a very different phenomenon than many others in different sectors have seen. So, and yet recognizing that our teams are dealing with having children at home, having all of these complexities that frankly that everyone is dealing with, that became even more important around this daily drumbeat and weekly drumbeat of communications with our organization. So that's one of the things that I've been really focused on.
In terms of the kind of paid versus owned and performance versus brand, how have you thought about that? And obviously you have different lines of business, some that are impacted by this, some that like positively, some that are impacted negatively. Have you thought about changing that mix?
So my opinion on the conversation about brand versus performance is that we tend to get this wrong even outside of a global pandemic. So when I talk to my teams, I don't talk about it in terms of brand versus performance. I talk about it in terms of long-term goals and short-term goals. And I talk about, are we trying to introduce category and, for example, gain relevance in cloud, which is not a place where we've historically played. Okay, technically that's brand, but what we're doing there is educating about a new category. Or we are trying to make sure at the same time that people understand that we have great work from home solutions, and frankly have been doing that ourselves for the last 10 years and have a lot to say on this topic. So I have actually don't look at it as brand versus performance. I look at it as what's this part of the mix and this part of the content trying to achieve? Is that still relevant? Yes or no? And then make the decision about whether or not we keep it. So a bit different than I think the overly simplistic at times brand versus performance conversation.
I like that. And thank you for changing that paradigm. I ask it because I feel like almost everyone has a strong answer around it. It's not because I personally believe in it. I think the mindset of the industry has always been very binary around it, and it's definitely hurt the marketing practice overall, as well as some of the conversations around like how should you measure success.
Well, believe me, I got of internal help with documents that said, oh, you should go cut all brand. And so I actually don't use that word internally for that reason, because I don't want it to create the accidental impression that what we're spending in technically above the line advertising is just something that makes me and my team feel good. I mean, that's not really doing us what we actually deliver to the business, adequate service.
Yeah, what's funny is we were talking to some extent about, Naveen, you'll resonate with this, but there's the Silicon Valley hat, some of the investors who are just coming out and saying, cut everything, everything that's non-essential. And by the way, like a few weeks ago, they were saying, grow at all costs, spend money on marketing. And it was almost like a binary switch that just happened overnight. All of a sudden, cut everything that's non-essential. And I've been thinking a lot about, how do you counter that? And one of the things we noticed is when you're looking at the data from the last recession, you see that the brands that invested in marketing and product came out and completely overperformed everyone in their category. So it's really encouraging to hear from both Naveen and Allison and Jessica that you're continuing to invest and there's continuity in that paid and owned focus.
Mm-hmm. And equally important, I think, is the question of what you say and how you say it. So one of the conversations my leadership team and I have been having is, obviously, you don't want to ignore the current crisis, but at the same time, you don't want to start every piece of marketing communications or a press release or headline or a piece of content within this current crisis, And I am reminded of a piece of research that we did, was perception testing in the 2008-2009 recession, where we actually, after the fact, went and looked at some of the advertising we were putting into market. And there were a bunch of ads targeting IT professionals that said, in these troubled times, blah, 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 blah. And basically it was implying that you would need fewer IT professionals because you could be more effective and efficient. And the travesty was that people who saw that ad were more negative about us than people who didn't see that ad. Why? Because you are perceived to be piling onto a crisis. And frankly, you're hitting that amygdala function in people's brain. People are scared enough as it is. We don't need to begin every conversation with, in these troubled times, we have work from home solutions. We can drop that first bit and just talk about why our work from home solutions are great. And that's a balance, and it requires a level of thought and precision that maybe is sometimes a little hard to get to.
I love that, Allison. I think the other interesting piece is the fatigue that I think we're all feeling around this COVID content. Like on the one hand, it is my job to say that the data, at least from the measurement we've been doing, shows that COVID content is really resonating, right? But at the same time, it feels like we're hitting this inflection point. I'm curious, how have you thought, obviously you have so many stories of how you can help people during this time. How have you thought about telling those stories and also kind of framing them in the mindset of, let's get ready for when we come out of this?
Mm-hmm. So first, if you think about the different audiences, and I realize it's not a marketing question specifically, but our internal employees, they are one of the most important audiences to know what we're doing and how we're responding. Everything from what we're donating to the way we're using our technology, lending our supercompute power to institutions like TGen, which are doing sequencing of the virus. There's a lot of those things where we're really telling and celebrating those stories internally, that we're taking a different approach externally, which is we're sort of just letting them come out little by little, because we don't want to come across as we're so great and we're doing so much. Because frankly, I think all of us recognize that no matter what we're doing, it's not enough. So we don't want to be perceived as jumping on that bandwagon. So we're doing a slow roll of those communications instead. And then to your second part of your question, Anda, about what comes next, we're also doing scenario planning around the honest truth is when the recovery starts, whether it's a V, a U, or a L, I don't think any of us knows. But I think what we all know is it's going to be an incredibly lumpy recovery, meaning that there are certain industries that are going to recover really well, and there are certain industries that are going to really struggle and potentially go out of business. So how do we get more sophisticated on vertical messaging and targeting and content, which frankly we haven't been as great at in the past, but that our past experiences no longer apply because they weren't in response to the recovery from a global pandemic. I mean, there are some businesses, let's be honest, that are booming. So, and their technology needs are going to be greater than ever. So getting more sophisticated about targeting is, for me and my organization, one of the most important things that we can do now.
That is a very, very smart point. I'm curious, Allison, as you've adapted to the new normal, especially as a team, what are some of the practices that you've put in place, both in terms of your team as well as the larger Dell organization, to make sure that you're keeping everyone productive and also positive?
So we, as we have been on this, what we call our connected workplace journey for 10 years, right? So we had a very ready system that could easily pivot to now 92% of our employees are working from home, and the 8% that are not are in factories making technology, right? So we had a pretty good foundation. What we also had, interestingly though, was holdouts, even sometimes at our very senior leadership team, of, well, no, I need to be able to do this face to face, and kind of, I don't believe in work from home. And so even in our culture that was as far along as we are and were, there were resistors. And so we've had to deal with that. And you suddenly see this conversion, frankly, of even some of our most senior leadership. And then what we're training people on is what channel and what medium to use for what. So some of the advice that we've been giving people is use video, but equally important, don't overuse video. There's all kinds of research coming out now about how our brains are getting totally fried because we're over Zooming. And you think about the cognitive load around looking at everybody's background. And, there's a lot of research that's starting to come out now about, in a meeting, in a conference room, you can pretend to be paying attention, but actually like doodling and nobody's looking directly at you. But when we're suddenly all looking at each other and I'm checking out what's in your background and I'm thinking about like, is that your dog is cute? Or like, do you really use that exercise ball behind you? I mean, all this shit that you're doing with your mind, that is incredibly overwhelming. So yes, use video. The richer communication is really important now for that connection, but don't overuse it. And sometimes a phone call is enough. And then that's the kind of training that we've been giving our own employees. And then for me personally, what I've done is where I would have had a multi-day meeting with my leadership team, I've just chunked that up into fast response. For a while we were meeting 3 times a week for an hour. Now we're meeting 2 times a week for an hour, so that we could get the engines quickly and that we could prioritize and get our organizations unstuck. And then the final thing is, we don't do anything like this is the hour where we don't talk to each other or anything like that. We leave that much more in the hands and the discretion of our employees, but acknowledging that that's there. So in the early days of this work from home phenomenon, the most frequent question that we got into our HR chat system was, my manager doesn't realize that I'm trying to deal with my kids also being at home and they still want me to be on this 7-hour Zoom call. And so we've started with our senior leadership and then the next levels of leadership saying, you got to chunk this up. It's basically not possible cognitively for people to engage in the first place. And secondly, if you think about the average age of your most senior leaders tend to be over 50, well, they don't have a 4-year-old at home. So you have to have a little bit more empathy for people who are in a different life stage than you are. So that's the kind of training that we've been doing. And, we've done things like Michael and his leadership team. We normally do a quarterly meeting with our employees. It's high production broadcast. But this time we just did it all from our homes. We pre-recorded it on Zoom. We took hundreds and hundreds of questions. And our team members loved it because we were honest. We could tell them what we knew. We could tell them what we thought, and we could tell them what we didn't know. And so we've gotten very good feedback for the tone and the frequency of communication.
I love that. And I like the idea of being zoomed out. Just as a testimony, the entire time you've been speaking, my brain has been partially wondering where your dog is.
My dog's just in the bathroom right now.
Okay, I see.
famous in my Zoom videos.
I hope we get to see your dog before the end of the webinar. Allison, thank you so much for that. I wanted to pass it over to Rachel to read the results of the poll.
But by the way, Allison, that was really powerful. I think you should turn that into a LinkedIn article, Medium or something, because it really resonated with me as a leader. And I agree with that sentiment because I'm literally in a store getting very distracted, even my own webinar.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So the poll results for those who voted, pulling them up. So most folks are saying that you've increased the volume of communication by 2x. That seems right for this group. I think it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy because if you're tuning into Knotch MikMak webinar, you definitely invest in content. But it's interesting to see there's such a disparity. It's not a clear winner necessarily. So thanks for voting. All right, we are about to bring up another powerhouse in our industry, Nadine Dietz, the Chief Community Officer at Adweek, also the founder of CMO Moves. If you don't know Nadine, then you're definitely not in our industry. Nadine, thanks for joining.
Wow, thank you for having me. What an intro. Thank you so much.
Of course. So Nadine, I mean, you literally speak to everyone. You have your finger on the pulse in this industry. But you also are a very different type of brand. You're also a face of Adweek. So just to start off, I want to hear what you believe is Adweek / your responsibility right now during COVID-19 to the community.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so that is definitely a big question. So at Adweek, I'm responsible for our community. So really being tuned in to understand what the community needs right now. And we also have an entire edit team. So they're being as responsive as they can be in bringing the news forward very, very quickly. And together, all of Adweek, we've really pivoted in these last few weeks as well, right alongside of our community in the way that they've been asking us to pivot to serve their needs the best that we can. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, for 2 years now, every single week I put out a CMO Moves podcast, and I went dark for 3 weeks on purpose when all this started happening, because it just wasn't the right time to do that. And I turned everything that I was doing with my team to be more inward with the community, so that instead of us just putting content out there that we know that they either would want to hear or not, we decided to just shift the entire model. And we started hosting tons of community calls with different communities. We have lots of different micro communities. We're all one big community. But the first call we did was a call with Indra Nui, who is the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo. And we had about 20 CMOs come onto that call. And she gave us a tremendous amount of guidance when all this was just really kicking off. And we all left there with her mantra in mind. And it really set the tone from that point forward, which was, in her words, be nostalgic about the past, realistic about the present, and optimistic about the future. Mm-hmm. And when we really started to kind of pick it apart in that way and think about, okay, right, like those are distinct buckets and you have to manage those things differently, we started drilling in deeper, and we hosted a number of other calls, you know, where we focused on optimism. Yes, there's a lot of challenge right now, but what can we be optimistic about coming out of this on the other end? And we had all kinds of folks weighing in about, you know, I'm really optimistic about the change in the industry as a whole being more humane and really thinking about humanity first and foremost. The pivoting that everyone's doing to serve their consumers as best as they can, or to work together to do something better. There was a lot of a lot of optimism around the fact that people are, for better or for worse, spending a lot more time with their families than they ever had before. And how do they turn that into an inspirational moment for them? How do they juggle? Some of them have opportunities where they can take and block time on their calendars just for families. And we hear that a lot, which is great. You know, and we really pivoted from that point, you know, to not just thinking about being optimistic, but then really activating. You kind of go through a process of around triage, which is, okay, everything just stopped working, and how do we plug the technology holes and, find toilet paper and all that stuff. And then you move into more of like the function role, like, okay, what's the, the minimum course we have to hold right now just to hold the function. Then you move to the empathy part, which is, okay, we're all in this together. And we've seen that hashtag everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And how can we now do things to lift us all up? I think what we're seeing right now as well is, as we've done more and more calls around retail or DTC or building the business case for humanity, all these different calls where we're talking to folks, what's happening in the background is technology is leapfrogged. Mm-hmm. And I had a futurist come on the show. That was the first CMO moves that I put out coming back, because all of those projections 10 years from now are now 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. Things to the degree where we will all be, augmented humans. We already are with our mobile phones, but it's just external. But the point where we're all going to have internal connectivity is right around the corner now, because technology just got a giant shove to get better. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the implications that has for marketing, they are vast. And that's the stage we're in now, which is, holy crap, all these things just became available. How do we do our jobs differently now, taking advantage of this leapfrog?
So I totally hear you on remaining optimistic about the future, but I also know, you're doing everything you can to try to create jobs and connectivity in the industry. Mm-hmm. And you're working a lot with retailers that have had to furlough their employees. What's your advice to folks who might even be on this line right now, where they got laid off, furloughed? Like, what are your projections for the future jobs of marketers come, 2021?
Yeah. Okay. So that's definitely put me on the spot to make a prediction. But here's what I will say. Yeah, we heard it loud and clear, right? There wasn't a single call where that didn't come up. People are personally invested in their teams. And the people on the teams are personally invested in their brands. And when a vast majority of them go through furloughs, those are heartbreaking. Also, in a lot of cases, there are just net layoffs, right? So we responded as quickly as we could. We turned on Adweek Jobs, which had about 5,500 jobs. We turned it on for free for everyone. We said, if you're looking for a job, you can have access to this for free. If you have a job to post it for free. If you need access to resources and you don't have a job, you can have Adweek for free. Everything we offer, just have it, right? That was the first thing we did. And then we got a little bit deeper into it, and we said, wait a minute, we can do more. So we put together what's called Brands Together, where we had so many people volunteering to help, even if furloughed positions. They want to do something to keep their skills, really sharp, and volunteer to help each other. So we put together a portal where brands can come and collaborate around topics, and then people who are looking for ways to support can jump into a project. A good example is, we just had a big call yesterday. Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting what day of the week it is anymore. That's the other thing about Zoom. You never know what day it is anymore, right?
For me, coffee o'clock, o'clock, and wine o'clock. And that is my entire day.
Exactly. Yeah, so we had a really cool call. We had Feeding America, No Kid Hungry, Gen Youth, plus a number of brand leaders and a number of volunteers, all talking about a really important problem that isn't getting enough press right now, which is that a lot of the kids who are in the school system, because they aren't going to school right now, are not getting food. School was their primary source for food. And when they leave on Friday afternoon, come back on Monday, they weren't eating. Now what happens when the schools close, how do we get that food to those kids? So being able to work together and think about things differently, and try to fix the problems where there might be breakdowns or the shortages, has been really rewarding. And that comes back to that optimism and empathy and humanity. Like, we all have superpowers, and maybe it's not applying it in the way we thought we were, but there are new ways to do it now.
I want to take a question from the Q&A for you, because I think you can answer this.
Okay.
So this is from Francois. We've heard a lot about mindset shifts, agility, empathy, optimism, everything you were saying Indra knew he was instilling. But what kind of skills will CMOs need to master to best navigate COVID post-crisis?
it's an excellent question, right? And again, this was another call where we were talking about this very thing. There is no playbook for what we just went through. And it would be silly of us to write one now, because we need to focus on what's next, which is what does the future look like, right? And we've had lots of learnings from that. But I think the new skills, or I'll say skills that a lot of CMOs already have that need to get dusted off and polished more so, is really being first and foremost team leaders. A lot of the ones I work with are already doing this in an excellent way, but even being more empathetic. I mean, I think this has forced a level of connectivity at all levels of an organization that I think a lot of the silos have been broken down, and a lot of the hierarchies have been broken down, and people are just much more humane. And in terms of, I think we're going to have a whole new different way of working with our teams, where everybody's voice will be heard equally, more so now than ever before, which in some cases that wasn't the case just because you weren't physically with those people. I think there's going to have to be more of an eye towards reputation management as a brand. When in the podcast with Raja, we were talking about crisis management, and there's lots of kinds. Reputation management is part of crisis management, and we just went through that. How do we invest in reputation and brand building, which could be a long-term gain, but against the pressures of the short-term payoffs, which most CMOs are under demand to deliver? And so there's a lot of things that are coming up right now, and again, there is no playbook, but it's not like we haven't been through crisis before. We can learn from looking back at other time periods. And at the end of the day, it comes down to people and how are we working with people? And that has to be the number one focus.
Well, everyone, while you're home, Nadine has some of the best content on the internet. Please listen to CMO Moves. It's really inspiring. I think you've shaped a lot of marketers' outlook on their career. So thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So Anda, I think we're now going to bring up one of our favorite marketers, Nick Drake. Nick Drake in the house from the West Coast. Nick, you want to take your mute button?
All right, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I love this new look of yours.
Yeah, this is a gift from Lorraine. This is our COVID hoodie. And it has a special message on the back that's uniting her leadership team as we sit here in the front lines in our living rooms.
I love it.
Comfort and style, yes, Google style.
You always wear the brand on your chest, so it's
try.
So I think Anda and I are both going to chat with you, since we both have so much respect for you as a marketing leader.
Yeah. So. Nick, you've recently transitioned to the dark side of tech. Before that, you spent quite a few years at T-Mobile, and back then you were wearing a lot of hot pink. Now you're in tech gear, and before. Oh, there you go. Okay, there's still some hot pink, and. Before that, you were at Adidas and Quicksilver, and apparently you also started on the agency side. So I'm actually curious, we haven't talked too much about agencies. I was reading news about, some difficult layoffs and decisions that different agencies, the big holding groups, have had to make. Would love to hear your thoughts on how you've been working with external partners. I know you guys work with quite a few agencies. And also just as a marketer separate from Google, what are you seeing happening across the agencies? And by the way, this is Frida. Hello.
Yeah.
Frida's now famous.
Awesome. Oh, so good to see Frida. In fact, that's been one of the, if you try to find positives in these really rough times, it's been the intimacy that you can create with some of your colleagues, children, dogs, cats. In my case, new addition has been a bearded dragon. They've all appeared in our GVCs, and it's been a really great way to know some of your colleagues in probably a much deeper way than we had done if we'd been in the forums in the office. Yeah, you're right. I guess I've done two agency tours. I did very, very early. I did a tour with what is now Dentsu Aegis on the media side, and also with Shy at Day from a advertising perspective in Los Angeles. I think what sits at the heart of your question is there are very real ramifications for the decisions that we make as marketeers at the moment. And it's incredibly important in these times that we don't take decisions without thinking about the entirety of the ecosystem. And so at Google specifically, we've been doing a huge amount of work to make sure that
Did we just lose Nick?
I think we lost Nick.
Oh no.
By the way, this really funny thing happened. I was on mute, but when Nick said Google, I think he said the word okay before it, and my Google Home just started talking to me. Nick, are you back?
Nick, cut out.
Did it recognize my voice?
I think it recognized your voice, yeah. It's very excited that you were in my house. Sorry, you were cutting out. The last thing we heard was just the real ramifications of the decisions that we make as marketers. Yeah,
I was just saying that we're trying to be really mindful of that. As you know, like many businesses, we're making real-time decisions. It's not at the beginning of the crisis we saw a clear plan and thought, right, let's execute against that, and we could give our partners clear direction. It's been much more iterative as we've seen the resonance and real-time response from our customers and users to what they really need. And so it's been an ongoing process, but I'm really grateful that the company looks at our partners as partners, and these conversations are being had with them. Many of the CEOs of many of those holding companies are having daily, if not weekly, conversations about our business and where they can best support us, and we're giving them real-time feedback on where our current focuses are. So I think that the channels of communication obviously are incredibly important, and I think the message, certainly from our side, has been not just with internal teams, but also with partners, because, to use the cliche term, we're all in this together, and we're all going to come out of this together. And so it's been really important to think of that as an entire ecosystem.
So, I think that's really responsible of Google and you, because obviously you're one of the largest advertisers in the world. I imagine you had a lot of plans that you have to change.
Yes.
On the media side, maybe product launches. Are you able to speak to any of the big decisions that you've had to make over the last 6 weeks in terms of in-market activity?
Yeah, of course. People have asked this question a lot, and I think the answer is that we're focused in 3 ways. First of all, Google's mission is to organize the world's data and make it useful. And so obviously in a time like this, we have a duty to step up and be even more useful than perhaps we are in under normal circumstances. And that means, making trusted information abundantly available where people most need it. It means, helping users with things like well-being, or small, medium-sized businesses with continuity, or potentially building tools which could be useful to helping map the pandemic and hopefully expedite when people get back into some order of traditional working or traditional life, sort of referring to the project that we're undertaking with Apple at the moment. So there's been a vast plethora of different things, but to be very specific, and for my team, the first thing that sort of happened was, how can we be most helpful? And so within my group sits education, and I'm Stephen. I'm abundantly clear we should be having a conversation. So I'll just put this pretext to this. But the first thing that we went to go build, and we sort of dropped everything to do it, was a hub called Teach from Home that we built with UNESCO. The idea being that we wanted to have somewhere that everybody could go to figure out how to undertake distance learning. This isn't something that the world is really adept at, and I love the fact that Nadine was saying we've sort of jumped ahead in time. We totally see that, we've seen legacy businesses perhaps accelerate their plans by 4 to 5 years. And I think in terms of education, we may have leapt 10 years ahead. This is a tremendous challenge. And, I'd love to spend some time talking about, how people are dealing with being at home and trying to find business continuity, because if you're a parent, it's near on impossible to manage your lives in these times. So the first thing that we felt that we could do was put together a hub for parents, for teachers, for students, where they could find all the tools that they require to put some semblance of education in continuity. And that's no small undertaking if you think that site's in 100 plus countries now, translated into 35 and changing every day, different languages, and to go scale something that quickly that governments can turn to if they wish to. For instance, Italy are now using that as a sort of a center for the Ministry of Education to drive all of their initiatives countrywide. You sort of feel the burden of responsibility to get that to market as quickly as possible. So yes, some things that we were doing were paused while the team ran to go and execute initiatives like that. On my colleague Marie, who I think many of you know, on her side of the business, and Ace, on the ads side of our business, they put together a $800 million financial aid for small, medium-sized businesses. And again, that team paused everything to rush to be as helpful as possible to many of our partners, and I'm really thoughtful about where that spend is applied and how we are fair and democratic in who receives the help and what kind of help it needs to be. And then, from a product and engineering side, there have been parts of the company that have immediately orientated to trying to be part of the solution. And whether it's contact tracing, with our friends at Apple, or Google Creative Lab in New York creating Do the Five, which was 5 simple things that everybody can do to put themselves in a better position to avoid getting COVID-19. And we put that on every possible platform that Google has, from the Play Store to the Google homepage, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, you're right. A ton of different things were paused in lieu of doing that. And then, we started changing our tone of voice, if you like, and making sure that we, try to pride ourselves of being part of the cultural zeitgeist. And so trying to be part of, thanking and celebrating first line responders, et cetera, have been some of the newer, brand initiatives that have been started during these times. And then, there's business continuity as well, things that haven't changed. And, just because, we're all on a call together, but, we've worked with some of our Chromebook partners, for instance. So, Dell would be on the receiving end of some of our campaigns that we're running for Chromebooks in some countries, because there's just been a huge uplift in sales as people are rushing to digitize their businesses or their home lives. And so making sure that people can find the best information and get their hands on the products that they need to get through this period of time has become business essential, if you like. And that portion of the business has been moving at a rate of knots that we've never seen before.
Now, it's funny, just speaking from my own experience at MikMak, we were hiring people at a time where they'd never even entered our office, and just how we had to change buying computers for them and setting up their home office.
Yeah.
It's so great to see you via Zoom. I miss you for joining us.
I was biting my tongue, but I'm sure we could host the next one on GVC.
Yes. Well, we really appreciate it, Anda and I. We know how busy you are and everyone on this panel, so thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to bring up now our final speaker. Obviously, if you've tuned in for the last 5 weeks, you'd know I'd figure out a way to talk about e-commerce. So James from McCormick, can you take yourself off mute and come forth?
Hi. Good afternoon.
So James is the head of e-commerce at McCormick. If you guys are home cooking, you're definitely using at least one of his products. I know I was using your hot sauce yesterday. I made spicy cauliflower rice. you know, everyone has been talking about digital transformation and how we've leapfrogged, you know, consumer behavior that analysts expected by 5 years. I know you're seeing that within online grocery. So I'm curious, your team probably went from a very important team to the most important team overnight, and how you've been managing that change.
I like how you just branded that, Rachel. I'm going to totally steal that. But yeah, that you're absolutely right. My team had been doing a lot of testing and learning on kind of think online shopping, particularly within groceries, one of the categories that's not quite as developed when you think about e-commerce. So it's been a lot of, and I would say probably 4 years worth of testing, learning, building a case. Fortunately, we had put together some contingency plans even before this crisis got started. That was really about how might we step change. Now, it had always been a conversation of this is 3 to 4 years away. And that really evaporated and became our reality today. So what we've done is we have leaned in pretty significantly. And I think we've done it in a way that, you know, the word empathy has come up a lot here today. And that was actually one of the guiding principles that we used for the investments that we're going to be making, both in our creative, the content, as well as some of the e-commerce work that we're doing. So we're not doing things like a lot of digital banner ads and pushing kind of what we would call online demand creation. It's more about how do we meet consumers and online shoppers where they are, and that really starts with search. And fixing some of the digital shelf principles that we have in place. And what's happened is self-prophecy. Not only are people shopping online, obviously, for groceries much more today, but the return that we're getting is much better than we ever expected, and actually better than some of the testing that we've done. So it's been really a rapid acceleration, but certainly the right thing to do for the retailers that we partner with, as well as our own business.
And I'm sure, you know, we're all reading the same headlines right now. For example, bread making has gone, you know, out of the roof. Yes. So you see all the data. When people are buying your products right now, what else are they buying? Like, are you seeing some sort of story about American families in the kitchen right now coming together based on the data?
Well, it's a lot of that conventional thinking has gone out when you look at baskets. We just saw some data earlier this week, and some of our products that you would typically find, normally it's a protein that goes along with the seasoning or a hot sauce. It's really unusual things, and it's small appliances, it's crafts, things that we would not have. We're still scratching our heads in some cases about what we need to do with some of that data, but also finding kind of new and different ways to do the right targeting, do the right support. But one of the things too that did surprise us from what people are looking for, you know, our default was, well, we need to go into health and wellness and look at from a search standpoint, as well as recipes and how we think about positioning our products. And actually, one of the things that we did pivot on over the past 3 or 4 weeks has been people are just looking for a good home cooked meal. Yeah. So some of the top recipes that we would have thought would have shown up with things like, how do I use more turmeric, or how do I use, you know, immune boosting recipes, actually are not where we're focusing. We're focusing much more about how do you create nostalgic recipes and those kinds of experiences for home cooking. Activities with kids is another place where we've kind of met consumers with things like slime, which is back again. Mm-hmm. Things like how do you create meals with your kids, and tips and tricks for helping kids participate, which has been, I think, the right thing to do from a creative standpoint as well.
So it sounds like there's been a shift in terms of what you were expecting. You can't do original content production right now. So how are you optimizing content to meet consumer needs?
So 90+% of our content is done in-house. So that is both an advantage, but it's also a challenge in the situation that we're in right now. So we continue to use our in-house production right up until we could and safely could for our employees. But we've actually pivoted now to, we now have like our culinary team doing at-home videos and at-home hand shots, which is certainly challenging from a logistical standpoint, but we're getting just as good response and just as good engagement. We also work with some bloggers that and through our YouTube channels that are continuing to do that work at home, and they've got a really great following.
And want to dig a little bit into, because this speaks to what you just said, skills within the organization. So if all of a sudden e-com has grown in importance, but you had a bunch of marketers servicing like Walmart, brick and mortar, how have you begun to upskill people in e-commerce, performance marketing, digital shelf creation in the last 6 weeks?
So the evangelization didn't just start over the past few weeks. It has been ongoing for several years. But I think one of the things where we have pivoted is just sharing additional data. We're a very data-driven organization, sharing what has been happening, where we have made some of these activations and some of the shifts in our funding. In fact, I guess one of the fortunate or unfortunate things is we're right in the middle of annual planning as well. So it's been timely to use what we're learning over the past 6 weeks and influencing really where we need to be, not only in the next 6 weeks, but think longer term for next year's planning as well.
Great. This is a great final question for you. And I'm obviously very bullish on online grocery. We're now where we thought the industry would be in the year 2025. A question that folks like to challenge me with is, yeah, Rachel, we know people are buying groceries right now online. Eventually life will get back to normal. So if a third of America is buying groceries online, once life gets back to normal, what's your expectation in terms of where that number nets out?
So I had the same question in our annual planning meeting today as well. It's, there are I've looked at many surveys over the past several weeks about what's going to happen on the other side, particularly within grocery. I don't know what the answer is, but I think there are probably a couple different hypotheses that we are working on. One is there's the loyalty that we see after first-time users in online grocery within our categories had been like around 20%. So you think about 20%, that's actually not that bad. I've seen surveys that have ranged between 20% up to 97% as recent as yesterday. I mean, kind of ridiculous numbers. Nobody's really going to be able to figure out what that's going to look like on the other side. Demographically, it's pretty consistent across the board, at least the data that we're looking at. And then the last piece of it is, when you look at the type of experience that people are having today, it's not necessarily the ideal experience. When you think about out of stocks and you think about the type of service levels and just the safety of the employees that are going in to do that shopping. So we think for our categories, actually the convenience that comes from a first experience actually is going to drive higher loyalty. I think it's going to change pretty significantly though. When you look at different segments and different categories, I think where people tend to be picky in their own shopping, where you've got really strong personal preferences like produce, I don't know if that's going to be that sustainable. But in a lot of our categories, what we're seeing is the repeat, even within these few weeks, actually is quite good.
That's
so
awesome.
We're bullish on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, James, for that and your predictions for the future of online grocery. So Anda, I know we're at time. Should we take one question from the Q&A and bring it to our panelists?
Yes, that would be great. I actually have a question myself, but I'm looking quickly. Do you have a favorite one? If not, then I'll ask mine.
No, you do it.
Okay. So for those of you, for those panelists who are still on, I'm curious in your kind of one biggest prediction around marketing in post-COVID. What's the biggest change we're going to see stick? And by the way, I just got a margarita from my fiance, so I'm going to be drinking this as you guys know. Who wants to jump in first? Rachel, do you want to go first?
My prediction for the future, one trend that's going to stick. Well, so it takes 21 days to build a habit. And I believe that in terms of like event-based marketing, we've now seen the power of virtual events. And I think virtual events will be here to stay absolutely through the year 2021. And this, going back to what we were just talking about, online grocery, online booze shopping, I 100% 100% believe that that's going to be a behavior that's here to stay.
I actually think it's going to be a little bit more challenging for the agencies in terms of building massive budget ads. Because what we are seeing is that, I think, Jessica, you talked about it a little bit. When you're doing things in 48 hours and you're creating these ads, which are highly effective across TV, across social, across many, many different things, I think the days of very, very expensive large campaigns and people were spending like $2-3 million building an ad, not the cost of distribution, just building the ad. I think those days you're seeing is so much more effective to just take images, just take stock, photography, your own employees, your own customers. I think it's going to redefine how ad agencies think about revenue in the future.
I'm really curious about just consumer mindset shifts. We've gone to like a really dark place, and coming out of this, like, what content will consumers respond to? At our brand at GrubHub, we thought a lot about coming out of this, how can we start to bring joy back and more entertainment back to our diners? It's not just about giving them a promotional code for free delivery. It's about giving them that adds value from like a surprise and delight or entertainment perspective. So we're actually currently thinking about more of an entertainment platform, just so we can kind of get people out of this feeling good. We've already started to dabble in kind of, and Rachel, you mentioned kind of live experiences. We've started to roll out our GrubHub Soundbites concert series. We started it in 2019, and we're extending it in 2022. So watch out for a live concert event from GrubHub and Seamless in the near future.
That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah.
And Jessica, just as you know, we're tracking how people are responding to content across so many different formats. And the one thing I'll say is that the trends are changing so fast from one week to the other. It started with utility content doing really well. It's evolving into a lot more inspiration and hope. What we've seen not do so well is kind of CSR and donation content. But it's really changing very quickly. So we'll keep you posted.
Yeah.
Dean, do you want to add your 2 cents?
Yeah,
I know
just
it's
before,
late for you. I'm surprised you're still up.
As midnight has approached. No, I mean, I'm genuinely fascinated by all of the sharings. I think there's a macro point about value-driven marketing. Not values, but value. What is real value to our customers, to our stakeholders, to our shoppers? So I think that's going to be the prevailing spirit. So there's not going to be a lot of, positioning and sort of reputation management. People are going to look for genuine value. I mean, and my advice is constantly look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They always play a role. Yeah? It's timeless. I think on a very practical point, my big bet is, as someone who's now counted all of the wood panels in the ceilings of our home, 137 to be exact, you're going to find more and more value propositions, products, services that you can do at home. So the challenge will be businesses who have had a lot of on-premise consumption. What's the pivot? If there's going to be less on-premise consumption, what will be the in-home versions of what you might have offered? And that's why I think the McCormick business is going to thrive. And I'm a heavy user, I have to confess. Yes.
Thank you, Dean. James, do you wanna add your last 2 cents? You just got to compliment.
Sorry, were you mentioning me?
Oh yeah, I was. I said,
yeah,
you just got a big compliment.
I think Dean has a great prediction. Actually, we've done a lot of work about recessionary periods and looking to the future. I do think we're going to see some shift in habits as you think about the value creation that's made with brands that are investing now. But then also our business in particular in home cooking, I think tends to do it quite well during recessionary times. And we went back all the way to the early 1900s and pretty exhaustive work. But when you think about predicting, I do think that there is going to be a surge in nesting. There's going to be a surge in home cooking and creating new memories.
Thank you, James. Well, Rachel, I wanted to just quickly tease next week's webinar. You now have the ability to not only sign up for next week, but for the next few weeks. Since we know we're going to be stuck at home, we're bringing a few more amazing voices together to just learn from each other. Next week, we have the CMO of Abbott, the company that has created the 5-minute COVID tests and the 5-minute, what do you call it? Help me, Rachel. I'm blanking. I'm having an English blanking moment. Oh, antibodies test. That's what I'm looking for. The CMO of Zillow, the CMO of VMware. We have the CMOs of UPS and AT&T coming up. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to hear from a lot of different folks.
CMO of Unilever coming on. It's going to be a big one next week.
Yeah. So sign up and make sure that you join us for the next few weeks.
Well, thank you, everyone. This is always such a humbling experience to see how long so many people stay with us. We hope you have a great evening and see you next Thursday.
See you next Thursday. Bye.
Bye.